I need to read the skill file for front-end design. Actually, this is a writing task, not a front-end task. Let me just write the story directly. The names to avoid: Graham, Christine, Margaret, Helen. I'll create new characters with NZ-appropriate names. Narrator, male, 60s, and other characters. Let me write the story now. A New Zealand family drama with the same emotional arc as the original. Ultimatum secret preparation public twist at a family event. Adapted for a 60-plus male NZ narrator. My daughter-in-law gave me an ultimatum at the family Christmas party 3 years ago. She said if I didn't sign over my share of the farm by New Year's, she'd make sure my son never spoke to me again. I smiled, nodded, and started making my own plans. Let me tell you how that went. I'm 67 years old. I've lived on this piece of land outside Masterton my entire life, the same paddocks my father broke his back on, the same creek that flooded our wool shed in 1983, and again in 2004. When you've watched seasons turn on the same hills for 6 decades, you develop a certain patience. You learn that the weather doesn't care about your feelings. You learn to watch, wait, and move only when the time is right. I was married for 31 years to a woman named Judith. She passed in 2019 pancreatic cancer very fast, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I won't dwell on that here, except to say that losing her remade me in ways I'm still discovering. She was the one who kept the peace in this family. After she was gone, there was no one left to do that job, and it showed. My son's name is Daniel. He's 41 now. A good man at his core. I have to believe that, but he married a woman named Vivienne 10 years ago, and somewhere in those 10 years he changed. Not all at once. Slowly. The way a fence post rots, looks fine from a distance, until the day it just falls over. Vivienne is from Auckland. I don't say that as an insult. I've known plenty of fine people from Auckland, but she'd never lived rurally before Daniel brought her down to the Wairarapa, and she never really settled into it. She found the farm inconvenient. She found my friends dull. She found me, I think, an obstacle. She wasn't completely wrong about that last part. The farm had been in our family since 1951. My father bought it from a returning soldier who needed to sell quickly. 640 acres, half of it hill country, the rest flat river terrace. We ran sheep mostly. Some beef cattle in later years. It wasn't a showpiece operation, never had that, but it was solid. Paid for the house, paid for Daniel's education, paid for his sister Robin's wedding when she married her husband and moved up to Hamilton. When Judith died, I had a will in place that left the farm equally to Daniel and Robin, with a life interest to me, meaning I could live and work on it until I chose to stop or until I died, whichever came first. This was agreed. Everyone knew the arrangement. Robin had no interest in the farm. As a going concern, she'd built her life in the city, but she didn't want to be cut out either, and I thought that was fair. Vivienne did not think it was fair. I started noticing it about 18 months after Judith passed. Small comments at first. Robin doesn't contribute anything to this place, does she? Said as a statement, not a question. Then bigger ones. Dad, have you thought about consolidating the assets? Then Daniel stopped ringing me on Sundays the way he always had. I'm not stupid. I've dealt with stock agents and bank managers and agricultural contractors my whole life. I know when someone is working an angle. The first time Vivienne spoke to me directly about the will was in April the year before that Christmas. Daniel wasn't home, or he'd conveniently stepped out. I was never quite sure which. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where my mother used to make pastry on Saturdays, and she told me she thought the current arrangement was unsustainable. I asked her what she meant by that. She said that with farming costs what they were, and with the land values having risen the way they had, it made far more sense to have a clean ownership structure. She said Robin getting half the estate when she'd invested, nothing was holding the farm back. I said Robin was my daughter. Vivienne smiled the way people smile when they think you've just proved their point for them. She said she understood that, of course. But family sentiment and sound business decisions weren't always the same thing. I thanked her for her thoughts and told her I had some work to get back to. I lay awake a lot that winter. Not because I was frightened. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't frightened. I was calculating. There's a difference. I was thinking about how this was going to move, and in what direction, and what I needed to do before it got there. I rang Robin. I told her what had happened. She went quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Oh, Dad." Just that. 2 words. And I understood everything in them. I rang my solicitor, a man named Peter Aldridge in Masterton who'd done our family's legal work for 20 years. Peter is the kind of person who says very little and means everything he says. I told him what was happening, and I told him I wanted to understand all my options, not just the obvious ones. He said he'd look into some things and come back to me. He did. A week later, with 3 pages of notes that I read 4 times at my kitchen table before I felt like I properly understood them. The situation, as Peter explained it, was this. My life interest in the property was protected. Nobody could force me to transfer anything. But Vivienne wasn't trying to force me legally. She was trying to pressure me socially and emotionally through my son over time. The real risk wasn't legal. It was relational. And the best protection wasn't more paperwork. It was clarity within the family, documented and witnessed, so that everyone understood exactly where things stood. I also learned, in those conversations with Peter, that there were some things I could do proactively that I hadn't thought of. Things that would make the situation considerably more straightforward, should it ever need to be straightforward in a hurry. I started working on those things quietly. Over the following months, Christmas in our family had always been at the farm. Judith started that tradition. When Daniel and Robin were small, she liked having a reason to fill the house. After she passed, I kept it going because it seemed like the right thing to do. That Christmas, the one I'm telling you about, Robin drove down from Hamilton with her husband and their 2 kids, and Daniel and Vivienne came over from the cottage on the eastern end of the property they'd built there 6 years prior on a section I'd given them. It was a Saturday. About 40 degrees in the shade, which is how summer works in the Wairarapa. We had the table set up under the big macrocarpa at the side of the house, the one that's been there longer than I have. I'd done a leg of lamb on the spit. There were about 12 people altogether, Robin's family, Daniel, and Vivienne. A couple of neighbors I'd invited because they had no family close by. My friend Kevin, who'd been farming the next property over for 30 years. We ate. We drank. The kids ran through the sprinkler. It was, for a few hours, genuinely good. Then, around 4 in the afternoon, Vivienne asked if she could say something. I noticed she'd already made eye contact with Daniel before she spoke. He looked at the tablecloth. She said she hoped everyone would indulge her, because there was something important she wanted to raise while the family was together. She said it had been weighing on her for a while, and she felt the right moment was when everyone was present. She looked directly at me. She said that she and Daniel had been thinking about the farm's future. She said she knew it was a sensitive topic, but that, with land values where they were and the changing nature of agriculture, they'd been getting some advice. She said she thought it was time for a family conversation about restructuring the ownership of the property and that she hoped Robin would understand that this was purely a practical matter. Robin said very calmly, "What exactly are you suggesting?" Vivienne said she thought Robin might consider formally relinquishing her interest in the estate, given that she didn't work the land, didn't live nearby, and had her own life well established in Hamilton. She said it would simplify everything enormously. She said there might be some financial recognition involved, though she didn't specify what that meant. She looked at me again and said she hoped I would support this conversation happening. The table was very quiet. One of the children dropped a plastic cup, and the sound of it hitting the grass seemed very loud. I took a sip of my water. I said, "I'm glad you brought this up, actually. I've been meaning to say something to everyone as well. Kevin, would you mind? I've left something in the house. Second drawer in the study. There's a large envelope. Would you be so good?" Kevin looked at me for a moment. We've known each other long enough that he can read a situation, and then he got up and went inside. When he came back, he handed me the envelope. I thanked him. I took out the documents inside, and I set them on the table in front of Robin. I said, 4 months ago, I signed a deed of gift, transferring an undivided half share of this property to your name outright, Robin. Unconditional. No life interest attached, it's yours completely. Peter Aldridge drew it up. It was registered with Land Information New Zealand in August. I let that sit for a moment. I said, so the conversation Vivian would like to have about Robin relinquishing her interest would now need to be a conversation with Robin herself, as a full co-owner, not as a beneficiary under my will. As a legal co-owner. Right now. Today. Robin picked up the documents. She read them. I watched her face change surprise first. Then, something that looked like relief. Vivian said, "You can't have done that." I said, "I can." And I did. "Would you like Peter's number to confirm it?" Daniel hadn't said a word. He was looking at the tablecloth still. I watched him, and I thought, and I feel the sadness of this even now. I thought, he knew. He knew what she was going to say today. He'd let her say it. And he said nothing. Kevin quietly refilled his glass. One of the neighbors found something interesting to look at in the middle distance. The children, mercifully, had gone around to the back of the house. Vivienne stood up. She said this was unbelievable. She said I had gone behind the family's back. She said she couldn't believe I would do something like this without discussing it with Daniel first. I said, I discussed it with Robin. It's her inheritance. I didn't feel I needed to discuss it with you. She looked at Daniel. He finally looked up. Whatever she expected to see in his face, I don't know. But she pressed her lips together, picked up her glass, and walked back toward the cottage. Daniel sat there for another minute. Then he said, quietly, I didn't know she was going to say all that today. I said, I know. He said, I mean, we'd talked about she told me it would be a conversation. Not I didn't know she was going to do it like that. I said, Daniel, I'm your father. I know you. He looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded, once, and walked after his wife. Robin reached over and put her hand on my arm. She said, Dad, when did you do this? I said, August. I wanted it done before Christmas. She said, why didn't you tell me earlier? I said, because then you'd have had to carry it. I didn't want you carrying it. I wanted to carry it. She squeezed my arm and didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Kevin poured me a proper drink and told me I was a cunning old bugger. I told him he wasn't entirely wrong. The days after Christmas were strange. Vivienne rang me twice, once the following morning, once 2 days later. The first call was angry. She said I had humiliated her in front of everyone, that I had been planning this for months, specifically to undermine her. That I was a manipulative old man who was ruining her marriage. I let her say all of it. When she was finished, I said, Vivienne, I transferred half of my farm to my daughter. I'm entitled to do that. I'm entitled to make that decision without asking you. I'm sorry if you feel humiliated, but I didn't humiliate you. I simply answered, in advance, a question you hadn't asked yet. She hung up. The second call was quieter. She said she understood that the transfer was legally sound. She said she wanted to know if there was a path forward. She used phrases like, working together, and family unit. It sounded rehearsed. I said I was happy to have a relationship with her and Daniel, but that the farm was no longer a subject of negotiation. She said she'd need to think about that. I said I'd be here. Daniel and I didn't speak properly until February, about 6 weeks after Christmas. He came over on a weekday morning, alone, and we walked the south paddocks together the way we used to when he was young, and I was teaching him the land. He said he was sorry. I asked him what he was sorry for. He thought about it for a while. We were walking the whole time, watching the sheep, the way you do when a conversation is hard and movement helps. He said he was sorry he hadn't stopped it. He said he'd known Vivian was going to raise the subject at Christmas. He'd told himself it would be fine, that it was just a conversation, that he'd step in if things got out of hand. He said he saw now that he'd told himself that because it was easier than the alternative. I said, "What was the alternative?" He said, "Telling her no." We walked for a while longer. I said, "I'm not angry with you, Daniel. I want you to understand that. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, but I'm not angry. You're my son, and that doesn't change." He said, "How did you know?" "That she was planning something at Christmas." I said, "I didn't know exactly what she was planning. I knew something was being planned. So I planned first." He actually laughed at that, a short, surprised sound. He shook his head. He said, "You're something else, Dad." I said, "I had a good teacher. Your grandmother. We didn't solve everything that day. Vivian and I are still careful around each other, probably always will be. But Daniel rings me on Sundays again. He came out to help with drenching in April. He brought the kids out in the holidays, and I watched them run through the same paddocks I ran through, and his grandmother ran through, and that felt like something worth holding on to. Robin came down in March, and we sat with Peter Aldridge together and went through the full picture, what she owned, what I still held, how the life interest over my portion worked, what would happen when I was gone. She asked good questions. She took notes. She told me afterward that she'd been frightened for a long time, quietly frightened, over years, that she was going to lose her connection to this place, to the family history, to the land that had held all of us. She said she hadn't wanted to say anything because she didn't want to cause trouble. I told her that was the thing about trouble, waiting for it to go away usually just gives it more time to get organized. She laughed. She stayed 3 days. We fixed the fence along the creek, the two of us, the way her mother and I used to do it. It was good work. I'm 67 years old, and I've seen a lot of changes on this land and in this family. I've buried a wife. I've watched a son drift and, slowly, come back. I've learned that the people who love you sometimes disappear for a while, and the trick is not to lose yourself while you wait for them. Here is what I know, from this experience, and from 6 decades of living. When someone tries to take something that belongs to your family, they are rarely doing it with malice, pure and simple. Usually they are afraid. Afraid of not having enough. Afraid of being left behind. Afraid that the future will not have room for them. I understand that. I even have some sympathy for it. But understanding the reason for something doesn't mean you should allow it to happen. You can be kind and still be clear. You can love someone, even someone who married into your family, and still draw a line. The land does not wait for you to find the perfect moment to protect it. The season comes, and if you're not ready, you miss it. People are the same. If you wait until things go wrong to start paying attention, you've often already waited too long. I am also aware, and I say this gently, but clearly, that there are people who will use family gatherings, holidays, anniversaries, as moments to apply pressure. They choose those occasions because the emotional stakes are high, and because they believe the social setting will work in their favor, that you'll agree to something you wouldn't otherwise agree to, just to keep the peace. My advice, for what it's worth from an old farmer in the Wairarapa: know your ground, before someone else tries to claim it. Get your paperwork right. Have the conversation with your solicitor before you need to have it in front of your entire family. And never, ever mistake someone's silence for agreement. They may simply be waiting for a better moment. The Wairarapa tree is still there. The table is still under it. We'll use it again this Christmas. This time I think it'll just be a good day. I've been turning this over in my mind for a while now, trying to work out what I actually learned from it, not the legal part, not the tactical part, but the human part. What it meant, what it cost, what it gave back. The clearest thing I can say is this. What happened at that Christmas table was not really about the farm. It never was. The farm was just the thing that could be pointed at, argued over, divided up on paper. What was actually at stake was whether this family would hold together on honest terms or fall apart on dishonest ones. Vivienne wanted the land, yes, but more than that, I think she wanted to feel that the future was secured, that there was enough, that she and Daniel would not be left behind. I understand that. I'm not without sympathy for it, but the way she went about it, the pressure over months, the chosen moment at a family gathering, the attempt to frame Robin's share as unfair when Robin had simply trusted that her father's word was enough, that I cannot excuse. You don't secure your future by dismantling someone else's. That's not building anything. That's just taking. I think about Daniel a lot. My son, who knew something was planned and stood back and told himself it would be fine. I don't say that with contempt. I say it because I recognize it. There are moments in every person's life when they know the right thing and choose the easier thing instead. And they justify it to themselves just long enough for the moment to pass. Daniel did that, and then he had to live with having done it, which I think was its own kind of reckoning. When he walked back out to those paddocks with me in February and said he was sorry, that was him choosing differently. That matters. That's the part I hold on to. The thing about intelligence, real intelligence, not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that actually helps you live, is that it's mostly about timing, knowing what's coming before it arrives. Not because you're suspicious of everyone, but because you've paid attention long enough to understand how things tend to move. I saw what was building with Vivienne, and I didn't ignore it or hope it would resolve itself. I went to Peter. I got my paperwork straight. I made a decision about Robin's inheritance before anyone could make it for me. That wasn't clever in any complicated sense. It was just the result of paying attention and then doing the work while there was still time to do it cleanly. And the courage part. Because there is a courage part, even when it doesn't look dramatic. The courage wasn't in that moment at the Christmas table. The courage was in the months before it. When I was sitting alone at my kitchen table with Peter's notes, deciding to act, even though acting would inevitably create conflict. Most of us will do almost anything to avoid conflict with the people we love. We'll wait. We'll accommodate. We'll tell ourselves it might still work out. I did some of that too, before Judith died. After she was gone, I couldn't afford to anymore. There was no one else to hold the line. What I want to say to anyone watching this who finds themselves in something similar, a family relationship that is quietly shifting, a pressure that is building, a situation where someone is trying to use love or loyalty as leverage, is that clarity is not cruelty. You can act with complete firmness and complete kindness at the same time. The two are not opposites. I did not shout at Vivienne. I did not humiliate her. I simply made sure that what was mine to protect was already protected before she had a chance to make it a question. Robin has half this farm. Daniel comes out on Sundays. The Wairarapa is still standing. That's enough for me.